I mean, I'm tempted to be to respond to the first aspect of your question, which was, you had mentioned, well, you had mentioned the Russian government's, I think the Kremlin's indignation about the state of U.S.-Russia relations, and the kind of implication that we're just doing this, striking out at Russia to further harm U.S.-Russian relations. And frankly, I find this kind of like look back in sorrow act and rhetoric a little bit overblown and a hard stomach. I mean, we're carrying out sanctions, the Magnitsky Act, the actions we took a week ago, 2 weeks ago, regarding Russia's cyber attack on U.S. electoral processes and continued harassment of our diplomats, and then going back further, the sanctions that we have about or have still in place regarding Ukraine and Crimea are all taken for a reason, and it's not just to poke a stick at Russia. It's meant to draw attention to some of their actions that we believe run counter to international law and the international community's standards. And we're not backing away from any of those actions that we've taken. And in fact, it's been Russia that has taken action specifically that have damaged bilateral relations. And we talked a little bit about them when we announced some of the actions 2 weeks ago, that they've closed down all of our American spaces. They've harassed our diplomats. They've shut down some of our bilateral exchanges, like the FLEX program, which was a hugely successful high school student exchange program for no reason other than, I think, just to strike back. And so I don't want to overplay this or whatever, or overstate this, but I think it's a bit hard to listen to some of the rhetoric that we've heard from various Russian spokespeople about our intentions here. Our intentions, as I said, are to use these sanctions, to use some of these actions to call attention to Russia's bad behavior.
Ambition greedy, not transformational. He goes on to cite a tabloid report on Bill Clinton's sex life. Powell is far more withering about Donald Trump, who he calls a national disgrace and an international pariah. In multiple emails, he comments on Trump's leadership of the birther movement, calling it racist, writing in one, quoting, quote, "There is nothing he can say that will sway black voters. He takes us for idiots. He can never overcome what he tried to do to Obama with his search for the birth certificate, hoping to force Obama out of the presidency." A senior U.S. intelligence official tells NBC News the site where the emails were posted, dcleaks.com, not affiliated with WikiLeaks, is believed to be a conduit for Russian intelligence. This is just the latest trove of hacked emails to disrupt the presidential race. There were those internal DNC emails released just before the Democratic convention, which revealed institutional bias against Bernie Sanders and led to the ouster of party chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That leak was claimed by a hacker who goes by the moniker Guccifer 2.0, widely believed to have been made up by the Russian government in an attempt to cover up their own hack. Just yesterday, that same hacker released more DNC documents, including one containing what appears to be the personal cell phone number for vice presidential candidate Tim Kaine. According to a memo obtained by Politico, hackers are also targeting state Democratic Party officials and have successfully breached and impersonated some of them. Interim DNC Chair Donna Brazile did not mince words when of who she holds responsible. Quote, "The DNC is the victim of a crime, an illegal cyber attack by Russian state-sponsored agents who seek to harm the Democratic Party and progressive groups in an effort to influence the presidential election. There's one person who stands to benefit from these criminal acts, and that is Donald Trump." It's not just the Democratic Party and other public officials being targeted. Not long after Russian athletes were barred from the Rio Olympics for doping, Russian hackers posted what they say are the drug testing records of gymnast Simone Biles and tennis star Serena Williams. Joined now by Malcolm Nance, 35-year career naval intelligence officer, now an MSNBC terrorism analyst. So here's my question, Malcolm. I find it as a non-expert citizen making sense of the news. You've got people saying this was the Russians, this was the Russians. I don't know. Why is that not jumping to conclusions that are not supported by the evidence? Convince me that there is a reason to think this is a concentrated effort by the Russians to essentially impact the U.S. election.
Well, there's a lot of evidence. And as a matter of fact, you know, you don't have to believe just what one or two people say. Virtually all of the top cybersecurity companies in the United States, CrowdStrike, Mandiant, others, have been studying these groups and have been watching the fingerprints of two very large groups. Richard Engel spoke about them a little earlier. There's actually three wings to this hacking world from the Russians. There's Russian intelligence, which operates two different hacking groups. I'll use the simplified names, Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear. Then you have cyber criminals who are also involved in these hackings. We call them cyber criminal bears. And then there are these militia, these freewheeling pro-Russian people who do hackings. We call them militia bears. These three bear wings all have had fingerprints at one time or another. But ATP-28 and ATP-29, which is advanced persistent threat, which are actually these packages of data that are left behind by the two Soviet agencies, the FSB, formerly known as the KGB, and the GRU. Their fingerprints have been over hacks all throughout the world. We've identified them in Estonia when they took down part of the Estonian internet system. Georgia, the Ukraine, German intelligence identified them as hacking the the German parliament. We've even seen them do false flag attacks pretending that they were ISIS's cyber caliphate army. ATP-28 and 29, these two Russian intelligence agency hacking packages are very well known, and their fingerprints were all over every aspect of the DNC, DCCC, the Hillary Clinton campaign, Colin Powell's. WikiLeaks appears to be their conduit for getting information out, and Guccifer 2.0 and this other group, DC Leaks, are just fronts for this intelligence operation.
All right, so then what does this mean? I mean, I find it like, I don't even know who's doing it. When I think about Colin Powell, who is a public figure but also a private citizen, when I think about Simone Biles' medical records being hacked, it's just profoundly unsettling to me. The idea of this sort of dystopian future we're entering into, of all this information being essentially in the hands of Lord knows who for whatever purposes.
Well, what's actually happening here is a very large-scale strategic political warfare operation against the United States that's being carried out by Russia. And Russia, you know, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the one agency that never changed was the KGB. They just changed their initials from FSB, FSK, then to FSB, and they were led by the spy master in chief who is actually running Russia right now, Vladimir Putin, former director of the KGB. These operations are an integral part in their political process, and they've carried out operations throughout Eastern Europe called compromat, where they try to compromise political groups and individuals, right, either through blackmail or through operations.
The States is still upset with Russia for tampering with the 2016 presidential race, noting that fixing foreign elections is something only Americans have the right to do. Officials called the leaking of emails Bush League, but stressed they were not referring to George H.W. Bush's masterful influencing of the 1990 Nicaragua election. In a statement, they added, "When we manipulated elections in Italy, Argentina, Panama, and Chile, it was okay because we were doing it to protect American interests. But is Russia doing it to protect American interests? Our sources say probably not."
And thanks so much for being here. Tom, I want to start with you. You worked at the FBI for 30 years. Why isn't the FBI as dead certain about a motive as the CIA is?
Well, Allison, the FBI normally tries to gather evidence to, substantiate claims that it would make. So they would want to have evidence in this case. For example, a couple of years ago, the FBI investigated Chinese government hacking into the U.S. and actually brought charges against members of the military operating out of an office in Shanghai. So the FBI will, get the information, but they want to be very clear if they're going to level accusations to a certainty that that Russia meddled in the investigation, in the election.
But Tom, are you saying that the CIA doesn't need to have evidence to draw its conclusion?
No, they can advise, the other agencies of the U.S. government and the White House and Congress without having proof certainty. They can say, we believe, and it looks like, and it might be, and it probably is. They're able to make statements like that.
Right. Well, since you are FBI and you are law enforcement based, do you believe that Russia meddled in this presidential election?
Well, I don't know, for sure that they did. I mean, we're hearing that they did, and I'm a little bit suspicious when I hear statements like all 17 agencies of the intelligence community. Well, all 17 don't conduct investigations, particularly cyber investigations. So you have 5 or 6 that may have a consensus that probably Russia meddled, and it looks like they did, but you still don't have agreement on what was the motive, why would they do it, that it actually, and then there's no evidence that it actually affected the outcome of the election. And we know that voting machines are not connected to the internet, so nobody could hack into
Right, nobody's saying the voting machines.
Results.
I mean, it's mostly just the DNC and RNC computers. Ambassador Burns, what do you think? Are you 100% confident that this in fact happened the way the CIA says it did?
Well, there was a director of national intelligence, General Clapper, who said publicly that the Russians interfered in the elections. There appears to be no disagreement among any government agency that they did interfere. So I support Senator McCain and Senator Reid, who are calling for a bipartisan investigation. If these allegations are true, this would be one of the most dangerous anti-American acts by a foreign power in a long time. And so we owe it to ourselves to get to the bottom of it. It can't be about politics. It's got to be what's best for the United States. And frankly, Allison, I think that President-elect Trump's reaction, which is to criticize the intelligence agencies and in a very weak way, not criticize Russia, I thought that was inappropriate and unwise for him. He has to lead these people in about a month. He has to be the person who inspires confidence in them. And he ought to be supportive in public of the entire U.S. government.
What do you think about that, Tom, that the president-elect is saying that he doesn't necessarily trust the intelligence agencies?
Well, I agree with that, Ambassador Burns, about that. However, we just had the actual president of the United States, Obama, tell Fareed Zakaria that that it wasn't on his radar, intelligence radar, that ISIS was on the rise. And so here's a president throwing the intel community under the bus. And in that situation, you had General Michael Flynn testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee in 2014, February 2014, that ISIS was on the rise. You had leaders of Kurdistan telling the State Department ISIS is on the rise. So you had a sitting president really not believe or not act on intelligence that he was receiving that did affect directly national security. And so Trump, the statements that he makes right now, he's not the president. He's not in a position to act. And secondly, I would go back to the comment about Clapper saying in October, that means that preceding his comments, September, August, back into the summer, that the intelligence community, when it was starting to believe that Russia was getting involved in the election, we heard nothing from the White House about this. We heard no specific actions or threats. President Obama met face-to-face with Putin at the G20 in September. What comments were made then to threaten them and say, you better not, we're going to come after you if you interfere in our election. So now, after the election, now we're going to have this big investigation. Yeah. And the other question I make on that is normally we come to a conclusion after the investigation, not before the investigation even starts.
Ambassador Burns, Tom Fuentes just laid out a lot of issues there. What do you want to respond to?
Well, I certainly agree that you investigate and then you try to determine the truth, not the other way around. This can't be about politics, and that's why it's got to be bipartisan. I think all of us want to do what's best in the national interest. I think what bothers people like Senator McCain and Senator Reid and others is when partisan politics interject and people say we shouldn't negotiate. But here's the largest issue. The president-elect is weak on Russia. He has been protecting, in his comments, President Putin throughout the campaign. He's not criticized Putin on Syria or Crimea or the Donbass or Putin and Russia's allegations or offensive behavior towards the NATO allies, the Baltic states. And so we need a president, and I hope President Trump can be this president who stands up to the Russians and doesn't, in essence, look the other way when the Russian government may be interfering in our elections. He is the president-elect. He needs to begin to assume that role and begin to protect the government agencies, build them up, and not tear them down.
Ambassador Burns, Tom Fuentes, thanks so much.